Good morning. I'll adjust a little. My name is Sarah. My Dharma name is Dojin. Does this feel loud to you? Is it seeming okay out there? Okay, that's better. Let's see. I want to begin with gratitude to Jizo Bodhisattva, who's behind me, and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas also in the other directions. And thank you to all the beings that contribute to our lives, known and unknown and human and otherwise. And to my teachers, who are many, but include my transmission teacher, Galen Godwin, who's the abbot of the Houston Zen Center, who lived here, and many teachers here who have guided me. And I used to live here for many years ago. It's very moving to be here. I want to acknowledge. Can you hear me okay? Like, Nadia, you? Uh-oh, now it's dangling. Okay. I also want to thank the many people who live here now. We are in a stream together of care for this beautiful place and Tassajara. And thank you for caring for a Dharma center, for making places in the world where people come together with this intention of taking up the Dharma. What I'd like to offer today, if you hear nothing else, is that I've come to have a deep belief and experience that the Dharma is a path of healing, that Zen practice is enormously supportive for healing all things, actually, but particularly healing the fundamental delusion of separation, or of imagining that we're separate from all things, and all the pain that flows from there. I'm here this week. So I lived at Green Gulch, I lived at Tassajara for many years, and then I lived in other places, including most recently, a large chunk of my life was in Sonoma County in Sebastopol, and I was a teacher at the Stone Creek Zen Center there. I lived with my family, and last year we moved across the country to Brooklyn, New York. Different, different environment, equally beautiful in terms of quantity, and differently beautiful in terms of what's beautiful about it. And it's a lot, actually. Our eldest daughter was born at Tassajara. And for those who know Kaya, some of you do, she's 20. I'm having a memory right now, actually, of I think it was in honor of Suzuki Roshi's 100th birthday, there was a skit night. And Kaya was a baby at the time, and she got to play the role of the reincarnation of Suzuki Roshi. Right here, actually. Yeah, like minutes ago, but also 20 years ago. And I'm here this week. I have a great gift and privilege to help co-lead a retreat for environmental activists with Tim Ream and Katie Dion. And we did this also last year, as like the first annual one was last year. And the whole idea is that Tim conjured along with other people, but he was instrumental in what from Zen practice can we offer to people who are engaged with the frontline work of trying to protect the planet and all the living beings here. And it's so wonderful, like the array of what people do who are in the retreat. And I think at one point in my life, that might have seemed like a specific set of people, but now it's like, i.e. all of us, protection of this planet and all the living things is all of our concern. It's not like a side gig. And so I spend a lot of time in preparation, but actually I think about this all the time in all settings. Like, well, so what does Zen, or maybe it's not what, because I feel it's again, like I'm totally convinced that Zen practice is a path of healing and of like supporting human beings in sustained engagement in the world of suffering. And this is true in, so we could maybe imagine that environmental activism is different than like being a teacher for first graders, even though that's not true. But, for everybody, how do we sustain committed, skillful, liberating engagement in the world of suffering without harming ourselves, without falling into despair or cynicism or distraction? But mainly despair lately is the one that, with people I encounter, that's the one that is the weight that's hard to lift. And again, in my experience, I feel like for me, Zen practice is the support that lets me joyfully return every day to engage with this world and care about and love all the beings in it and strive to reduce suffering and harm. I want to bring in the work of Dr. Paula Arai. Dr. Arai is a wondrous Buddhist scholar who currently teaches at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. She's done a lot of different work, but one thing to mention is a book that she wrote called Bringing Zen Home, that looks at the practices, particularly of lay women in Japan who are Zen practitioners, who have like long legacies and traditions of rituals at home. So much of particularly scholarship in Zen looks at rituals and ceremonies in monastic and temple settings. That's where most of the focus has been. And Paula has lifted up and given attention to the long legacies of the ways Zen rituals have functioned for people in the home. And through that, her study and her engagement, more importantly, with living human beings who do that, she wrote this book. And the first chapter of that book is called The Way of Healing, Yudo. And she talks about 10 principles of healing in Zen practice. The first thing she mentions is that the Four Noble Truths, so this is a foundational practice, not only in Zen, but in really every school of Buddhism. People heard of the Four Noble Truths? Yeah. For those who haven't, or just for a review for all of us. The first one is there is suffering. The second one is there is a cause. There's a reason why there's suffering. The third is we can interrupt it. We can actually choose liberation over suffering. And the fourth is the Eightfold Noble Path, which is like the how-to. And Soto Zen is roots in this teaching. And Dr. Arai talks about it as a medical model. So the first noble truth is the diagnosis, and then the Eightfold Noble Path is the prescription. to remedy suffering. And she talks about how really, and I think this is important, that there's different flavors of the suffering of a separated self depending on culture. Like for myself, so I am racialized as white. I've spent most of my life in the United States. And in the cultures I've grown up in and I've been conditioned in, there's a very particular flavor of self that coincides with, like rugged individualism and an idea of separation that has very particular both roots and functions. And I would say it's pretty bad. It's pretty like jacked up levels of selfness and isolation and alienation. And there's a function to all of that, that causes lots of harm. And it's also somewhat universal that human beings, because we have sense perception, can mistake the situation for us being separate from things. Dogen Zenji, who's the founder of Soto Zen, in the Genjo Koan says, to carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. So this is that root delusion that I'm talking, that I feel like is the one we need to keep addressing. To carry, so when we are in the orientation of moving ourselves through the world, like I'm separate and here's all the stuff out there, we are in delusion. When we are in, then he goes on to say, when myriad things come forth and experience themselves, that's awakening, that's freedom and liberation. And we can do that. We can orient that way. We can cultivate the capacity to learn about and move in the world, and actually even to, most importantly, like to train our body to move in the world where sometimes, and it never stays, I want to be clear. These moments of liberation, like we can create the conditions where they are more likely to arise. And we can move that way, where we're one of the myriad things coming forward, experiencing themselves. And those are moments of freedom. And they tend to be moments where we're less likely to perpetuate suffering. And it's more possible that we'll offer something healing or connecting than separating and harming. She says, we suffer because our actions are not synchronized with the way things actually ultimately are, which is impermanent and connected. So that Eightfold Noble Path, the first one is samadhi, or right view. And right view is essentially over and over again reminding ourselves, oh, that's right, things are connected and impermanent. And impermanent is super important and super helpful. It might sound like maybe if you're not into it, it might be like, I don't want to hear about things being impermanent. Like I have despair about the world. Because I can't get much into it today, I want to offer the possibility to check out in your own life how attuning to impermanence actually counters despair, ultimately, and also allows us to be whole and real and engage with reality, as opposed to like a little bit checked out or a lot checked out. And then the other part of that is things are connected or interrelated. We use the term emptiness. That can be misleading though, because it sounds like void. Emptiness is the fullness of how everything is in relationship to all things. Thich Nhat Hanh uses the term interbeing, how all things inter-are. All things. So this is really important. In Zen, all things, including ourselves, are constantly in relationship to all things. We are actually made out of all things. We are making each other. We are, every time we interact, we're impacting and co-creating each other. We are a flux. We're not a stable, fixed, permanent thing. And again, like attuning to that and cultivating that, not just with the mind. And I think this part's super important. Because we could be like, that's a great idea. Oh, I like it. But to actually feel this in our bones, like, and that takes effort, because much of, I would say, dominant culture, and I think it's true that many dominant cultures in cultures aren't emphasizing this. And so we have to kind of counter a lot of our conditioning to get to that place where we're one of the myriad things arising, and we feel it and we know it. And it's guiding our thoughts and our actions and our words and our interactions with one another and the world. Sorry if this makes a sound. So Dr. I talks about 10 principles of healing, and I won't talk about all of them, but I want to name them just so you can hear them. The first is experiencing interrelatedness. So that's just what I was pointing to. So in our being, not just an idea, but the actual experience of interrelatedness. And in our retreat, we have community agreements, and one of them is like, please don't make assumptions about other people's experience. And I'm like, ooh, I do that constantly. But I don't make assumptions about other people's experience. What I often do is say, like, I imagine that other people have had this experience, but maybe that's an assumption. Anyway, I'm going to guess that most of us, maybe all human beings, have moments of interrelatedness. When people tell their stories about their practice life, often they'll name a memory from childhood where it was like, I knew I was a part of everything. And then stuff happened to me and I forgot, These can be tiny moments, but they're big and important, and they're a necessary part of our cultivation of understanding and knowing and experiencing interrelatedness. And then, so all of the 10 that she mentions, you can see how they're all woven. The next one is living body mind. So how, again, like in an embodied way, we know this. The third is engaging in rituals. And again, so they grow out of and then keep informing one another. So when we engage in rituals, that's a training in interconnectedness. Zen practice is full of ceremony and rituals and forms. And my experience is they are all there to help us cultivate a lived experience of how we're related to all things. And the reason for that is so like we steep in this so that when we move in the world, again, we're more, the possibilities there to cause less harm. The fourth is nurturing the self. And I feel like this one is really, again, in my experience and in working and talking with and living with and supporting lots of different people, this is very hard, particularly if you are a person raised in the United States and probably other places too. But what's really cool is we can start to, if we work with those first two ideas, right? So we're really cultivating interrelatedness as a feeling. We're really cultivating this through the body, not just through ideas. We're engaging in rituals, we're trying that out. Then when we get to nurturing the self, we can do that and non-dualistically. That's a very different orientation than like a spa day, like a self-care spa day. So the idea, it's not selfish. It's not self-oriented. It's not self-indulgent to care for this one. For each of us have this one that we have been charged with caring for in this lifetime? And can we care for ourselves and nurture and nourish ourselves as caring for all beings? Can we see the relationship between that and what we can offer in the world? And again, I find it challenging with my conditioning, because again, the conditioning I received was hyper dualistic. And I was raised with messages of, to be a loving, caring person of the world, you forget yourself. Put yourself aside, put your needs aside. So for me, it's a very engaging act of reclamation and of like wholeness. Can I care for myself so that I can well care for the many people that depend on me and that I get to be involved with? So then again, if we can do that, if we can feel the support to do that, then caring for ourselves becomes another way that we are cultivating interrelatedness. Becomes, yeah, we heal that idea that we're separate by just lovingly tending our own body and hearts and minds. Okay. The next one is enjoying life. Goes right along with that. Enjoying life. The next is cultivating beauty. Creating beauty. That's the sixth one. So nurturing the self, enjoying life, creating beauty, allowing the nurturance and the interconnectedness of creating beauty in the world, noticing it and creating it. Cultivating gratitude is the seventh one. And then the 8th, 9th, and 10th are accepting reality as it is, expanding our perceptions, and embodying compassion. So all of these things building on one another and informing one another. For those last three things, accepting reality as it is, expanding perception, and embodying compassion, I want to offer an image from the Buddhist tradition, or story. So Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, this is Jizo. Behind the smaller being on the altar is Shakyamuni Buddha, and behind the bigger being is Manjushri Bodhisattva. And on the back side of the altar, when you walked in, is one rendering of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, who's the archetype or the embodiment of compassion. And in that rendering, she has a pretty humanoid form that we recognize. There are visual images of Avalokiteshvara that maybe some of you have seen. There's often, there are Tibetan tankas that depict this, but there are statues of this as well, where the body of Avalokiteshvara, so again, the embodiment of compassion, is a being that has a number of heads and what looks like a halo around them. That's actually 1,000 hands and arms, hands and arms. And each, just so you know, if you want to look closer, if you haven't looked at this before, each palm has an eye in it. And she has many tools. And that's a teaching to render her that way about how does compassion work in the world. And I want to tell you the story about her 11 heads. I love this story so much. I didn't mention that one of my other roles, or one of my concurrent roles in the world, alongside being a mother and a priest, is as a grief counselor. This is somewhat of a grief story. So the bodhisattvas become bodhisattvas by cyclical lifetimes of effort. And Shakyamuni as well. Buddhas become Buddhas by like trying and trying and trying. And our tradition is full of the stories of their past lives. Like Jizo has a great story about how they became the bodhisattva of fearlessness. And the story of Avalokiteshvara is that she was working and working over many lifetimes because, she was cultivating, and so she could feel connected with all beings. And so people's suffering really landed with her. She was like, okay, I'm going to help everybody. I'm going to get everybody out of the hell realms. And she worked really hard. And one day she did it. She got them out. And she was watching the last person leave the hell realm. And it's like, yes, it's happened. I did it. I'm done. And then she looked in this direction and people were flowing in because humanity, what we do, our realm is known for a number of things. One of them is this is the realm where people can wake up. Another is this is the realm where there's suffering. And we can wake up here because there's suffering and there's awareness and there's a possibility of cultivating the interruption of it. And we can only do that in the human realm. You need a certain amount of suffering. And poor Avalokiteshvara lost it, like just couldn't deal, and her head exploded. Is one version of the story. So it's like mind blown physically. No, like the grief was just too much. Like I'd done all this work, it's been lifetimes, and then like, what? And Amitabha Buddha was compassionately standing by watching all this. This is really, I'm riffing now. I've never heard anyone tell a story like it, but I have this image of Amitabha being like, yeah, and now your head's going to explode. And then Amitabha Buddha helped put this being's head back together in a form that could allow her to continue to be who she was, which is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And instead of just kind of putting it all back into one head, because that wasn't actually working, having one head couldn't deal with the enormity of the situation. He gave her 11. Actually, he's on the top. So she had her original eyes and face, and then a couple others, and then 3, and then 3. And then Amitabha was on the top, accompanying her always. And recently, as I was telling this story to someone, I was like, oh, the teaching of her 11 heads just really landed for me of like, right, we have to have a very wide perspective in order to engage and embody compassion in the world. Yeah, we have to look all around. And that's both like physically and metaphorically, So in any given moment, we need to account for the past and the future and what's on the sides, what's up and what's down, the wholeness of all the myriad conditions that are present. And just in case this is a little abstract, I'll share a story from my life recently. So we have an elder daughter who's 20. We had a middle child who would be 16 who didn't live very long, but she's very much included in my life of parenting, Sati. And then we have a younger child, Loka, who's 11. And throughout my life as a person in relation, in a living situation with other beloved people, I've noticed an impulse where I have this feeling, and I'm pretty sure some of this is inherited, of irritation sometimes. People know this with your loved ones. And if I try to pull up where it comes from is really, it's from my conditioning of being separate. And it says something like, I'm the only one who cares about keeping this house clean. Nobody else cares. And this house would look different, And so sometimes I even go so far to be like, what would it look like if it was just me, And then I'm like, what am I wishing for? So the other day I was having one of those little fits. And again, I feel my grandmothers in those moments. I feel my mom. It seems to be a female inherited thing. And I realized, wait a second, like I'm living the dream. Like I want to be in this family. I don't want to be in a house without them. Someday I will, or I'll die first. In any case, someday we'll be without each other, and that will be sad. That would be devastating. It's coming. Right now, we're all here, and I'm like squandering my time with these beloved people by being like, "We just picked that goddamn thing." And maybe it was because I was working on talks about healing and interconnectedness that I happened on a moment of freedom where I was like, maybe I'll just put that inheritance down, So I just offered, it's a, it seems like a small example, but really I had a physical sensation of unburdening myself of something that was pretty old. And actually, if I looked into, that was another thing, I was kind of like, there's this little irritability. And when I looked into it, it was like, actually, yeah, it's the tip of an iceberg. And the iceberg that's under the water is this massive thing that says, I am alone. I'm separate. I'm not a part of this. So it seemed little. It seems like it's about the mess on the floor. But actually, it's about that conditioning that says I'm separate. And if I didn't have a good look at it, it would perpetuate it. Maybe the last couple of things I want to offer are I feel, I've practiced Zen for decades. And so I felt supported in that moment to open to this other way of being. And that can be uncomfortable, actually. It's not familiar to live in the world in interconnectedness necessarily. And at the same time, I want to offer this possibility to all of us to try out, which is that it is our nature. I mean, actually, this isn't just me offering. There's this whole Buddhist tradition that says like Buddha nature is in all of us. but I want to offer it in this form of like that we don't have to oversimplify things and cut them up. That actually we can live in complexity. Not only is that like better and we're likely to cause less harm, it's what we're made for, is my recent inquiry and belief as I check it out. Actually, Paula Arai says, Buddhism is an experiential religion. The whole idea is like, don't just listen to these ideas and say yes, try it on. So I've been trying on this idea that we're made for holding complexity, and I feel pretty excited about it. And I want to offer it to you as something to try on. And in the Fukan Zazengi, so that's another writing by Dogen Zenji, the founder of Soto Zen, there's some other images. He offers an image. He says, like, when the heart of Zazen, when the heart of our practice is grasped, we are like the dragon gaining the water. We are like the tiger taking to the mountains. And both of these are based on old Chinese stories. And Dogen lived in Japan, but he studied in China. But essentially, those ideas are, so a dragon gaining the water in that story, a dragon is is a water being. Actually, a dragon is a water magic being, a water power being. So dragons can walk around on the land and they can fly and stuff, but when they get in the water, they're like, they're in their element. They're in the fullness of their power. And same with the tiger. When the tiger gets into the forest, that's a description of like a being entering their element. And in that, entering the fullness of their power. And so I've been using those images to imagine human beings, our complexity magic beings. That's our magic, like that's our power. And the complexity, the mess of things, the paradoxical kind of nightmare of everything is our element. It's what we're made for. We can, not individually, but together we can handle this mess. And again, not individually. So if we try to come at the problems of our world individually, or if we even try to come at it with others, but we're coming from an embodied place of separation, we will suffer. We will cause suffering. We will burn out. We will not be in the fullness of our power. But we can possibly, as particular beings, join with the fullness of reality on one another. Like we lend ourselves to be part of the body of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. How does she show up in the world? She doesn't have, it's not just 1,000 hands. It's a billion, billions and billions. It's our hands. We lend our particular selves to be a part of that body, to respond to the world. So just practically, and I'll stop in just a second. I can see the kitchen folks going. So practically, we can use that image in any given moment. How many heads am I using to look at this? How many eyes? Is it one head and kind of like this? And we can feel it, I think, or I experience. We can feel in any given moment, are we contracted? Are we getting smaller? Are we feeling separate? Or are we looking with 11 heads and 22 eyes that go all around? And we can notice and then start to cultivate, what are the things that support me to have 11 heads and come from that view. And then there's a koan in the Blue Cliff Record that says, medicine and sickness cure each other and the entire earth is medicine. And then that makes sense. The last thing I want to leave you with is before we can talk to each other more, is a quote from a teacher, philosopher, poet, and trickster being, Bayo Akomolafe. That I think that I read this recently and I was like, yeah, this. Your life's work is an intergenerational project. That is because we are produced by the manifold, by the collective, so that to squeeze the significance of one's life into the container of its biological duration is to lose sight of the ways death is generative, prolific, and even useful for continuity. It is to center the human in the very middle of a cosmic saga, all the while forgetting that the human is already ecstatically mediated by and dependent upon and threaded through with the non-human. To think of our lives as ours is to relinquish our accountability to our ancestors who often need healing and continue to produce effects. Our bodies are long bodies, wide bodies, spread out, queering space and time. Your failure, your confusion might very well be the nourished soil that coaxes out new possibilities from the earth. Our work is long, unusual, and always yet to be fully disclosed. The anorexic confines of traditional activisms cannot understand this or appreciate why many now feel invited to lean on the fences of conventional, intelligible action, even if it means being branded mad. Your life's work is an intergenerational project, an ancestral conspiracy, a continuous meeting of bodies, a queering of temporality. Your life is not yours to resolve, yours to complete, or yours to contain. It is necessarily the life of the many. Be thankful for the threadbare places of your life, for it gives the many who are yet to come something to stitch theirs with. Thank you. That's a Facebook post. You want to find it? Bio Komalafe is like the only reason I go to Facebook.
So we could take some questions now.
Yeah.
Would you pick the questionnaire?
I picked the question, or is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, we could have questions or comments, or responses from your own life, or yeah, where does this connectedness and experience of interrelatedness show up for you? Yeah, please. Do you mind saying your name just so I know who you are?
Hi, I'm Amy. Thank you so much for your talk. So I was curious, you spoke in the beginning about Japanese women practicing Zen in their homes and as an alternative or other practice to, of course, practicing in a temple. And I was curious to hear more of that. Had a moment of maybe the other side of your story of inheriting from our mothers, maybe this tendency to want everything tidy. I was hopeful there might be a lesson in there or something you could share.
Well, I really recommend looking at Dr. Arai's work. And actually, it's not just women. Zen practice has existed in people's homes for as long as there's been Zen practice. Like Dogen Zenji had lay followers. And so the teachings of monastic and temple life have always been woven into people's homes. It's just that in scholarship, that's been less emphasized. Sorry. And I would say, in my experience of convert Buddhist sanghas in the United States, and by that I mean sanghas like this one, and like the ones I live and teach in, I'm now at the Brooklyn Zen Center, which similarly is a convert Buddhist sangha, meaning many people there, not all, but many people were not born into Zen Buddhism as a religion, but came to it later. Something about the transmission of Buddhist practice from Japan to the United States, to those sanghas in particular, not to heritage sanghas where there are Japanese American practitioners who know that this happens in the home. This piece about lifting up lay practice was, I think, diminished, if not lost sometimes. And so then what happened, or I can at least speak to what happened at San Francisco Zen Center, is like the monastic model became like, oh, this is Zen practice. And then, like there are families, but it's a little bit derivative. I don't know how to describe that more than that. Secondary or something. Whereas actually, if we look even at the history of San Francisco Zen Center, there's always been lay people weaving in and out. So they're not different and they're not separate, and they never have been, not even in the time of the historical Buddha. But the emphasis sometimes has been, there's been an obscuration the fullness of practice in the home. And people, and there's a feeling sometimes of like, there's monastic practice and there's lay life, and those are different. And yeah, there's different things, but people always like it's the complicated mess. It's a weaving. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I want to point to how they're not separate, and how sometimes the practices in the home get lost. And actually, one of the impacts of that, particularly for convert Buddhist people like myself, it can be a feeling of like, oh, if I'm not practicing monastically, or if I'm not a priest, I can't do ritual. I can't do ceremony. And what's so great, I think, about Dr. Arai's work is this affirmation of like, oh no, there's a long history. We can own ceremony and ritual. We can do them. They have power. We can make them up. We can be informed and in a relationship, And so,
Thank you. So actually really helpful, because I'm a recovering Catholic
uh-huh.
and one of 8 kids. And
Mhm.
your vision of the 11 eyes is very much how we all feel. All 8 of us were close, and we all feel like we're actually,
You've got a
8.
body that
we've got this body. So
that's
it's
great.
really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for that image of your family. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that. One, so I've increasingly so been really attracted to and incorporate in my life the idea of both and you kind of talked about that with like that messiness that we're made for, and you could say like both and, like zooming in and zooming out, like the micro and the macro. Or Pema Chodron, I'm very much paraphrasing. Recently, I said something along the lines of, "There's stupid compassion, whereas if you just get walked on and have no boundaries." And then there, so I'm curious for you, in your experience, what are some of the most useful or fundamental or just personally meaningful both ands or kind of complexity dynamics? I'll just call it a both and dynamic that you've come across. I can ask a harder question.
That's kind of a hard question. Because I just think it's all the time. The dynamic is all the time. It's like noticing anything and letting it open into the fullness of what it is a teaching on interconnectedness. So I can't say, some are better than I can say being a parent's a big one of teaching for me, because it's pretty confusing. Like, it seems like I made them, and one of our children is adopted. Even him, I'm like, pretty sure I'm, basically formed you, and yet they are distinct people, and yet, so for me, there's a constant teaching, being in relationship to my children of, like the letting go. And like have like what's a healthy boundary is one way we put it, but being in relationship and having a healthy boundary, and it's a flux, Yeah, so to me, this is actually like an orientation, and I am looking all the time in terms of being a little bit more practical, because some of that's abstract. Is I really do feel, or I experience, that attuning to my embodied experience is a way that in any given moment I can check with, am I constricted or am I receptive? Actually, this word healing has been really useful to me lately. Is it healing or is it making things worse? So just that shorthand. For a while, for about a year, I had about a year ago, someone shared, Kristen Diggs, who some of you may know, who is a priest here, now lives elsewhere, shared a letter. And in that letter, there was a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown: "We need to flood the systems with life-affirming practices and policies." And when I read that, I was like, ooh, that's helpful. Life-affirming. So for about a year, just asking myself a question in any given moment. And, you know, this is mainly about my thoughts, or I want to recommend that we try this idea about life affirming or healing about our thoughts, because, and then our actions as well. Is that a life affirming thought, or is it a life destroying thought, a life diminishing thought? Is this a life affirming action or a life diminishing? I've gotten a little stuck like in the CVS being like trying to choose between products. I'm like, I don't know, but I'm trying. So having these, and I don't know what it'll be for you or anybody else, you know, but find the things that support you in an experience, in the experiences of interbeing. I'm sure you've had them, like I said, you know, even though I'm making an assumption. And like when you have those moments of feeling connected, don't skip over them, you know, soak them in, train the body in like, what does this actually feel like right now? So that you can refer back to it in moments of constriction, you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Thank you. I think we have about 8 more minutes.
Thanks for the talk.
Can you say your name?
Sure. My name is Mario.
Mario.
And sure. How's
There you
this?
go. Yeah.
So I have lately been spending a lot of time looking at the 5 remembrances. And
Yeah.
one of the things, the fourth one of everyone that is dear to us and everyone we love will be eventually separated from.
Can you hear him?
Can I? Oh, sorry. I speak softly. I'll
You got the
try to-
mic though. You
I'll
got to use
shout
it.
out, I'll shout another mic. So the fourth remembrance of all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature of change, and that we cannot escape being separated from them. And I guess I've been thinking a lot about interconnectedness in relationship to that remembrance. And I was wondering if, and I haven't figured out the connection to it, but I was wondering if you could comment on it.
I'm glad we have 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, so can we cover the impermanence part now? I'm glad you brought it though, because I love the 5 remembrances. I feel deeply supported. There's another practice that can support us. So the first one is, I am of the nature to die. So this is a training in Buddhism of a daily practice. And we recall, and you can chime in here. So every day we call to mind, I am of the nature to die. There's no escaping that. I am of the nature to have ill health. There's no escaping that. Actually, this one I have a little bit of a problem with. I am of the nature to grow old. Not everybody does that. So I like to say, I'm of the nature to grow old if I'm lucky. The fourth one, as you named, was all that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature of change, or there's different rendering. There's no way to prevent being separated from them eventually. And then what you didn't say was the fifth one, which I feel like is so important. The last one is, they're again, different renderings, but basically, I am the inheritor of my actions. My actions are the only true thing I have. Like that. So out of all these contemplations about impermanence, then we recall, how am I in the world? What do I do? Usually my actions are karma. So you were asking specifically about the fourth one?
Yeah, the fourth one specifically with interconnectedness and its relationship to it.
Yeah. Yeah, because what it says is like everything I love, I'm going to be separated from. Doesn't that sound like separation? I think it's a lifetime of work, actually, an exploration. So try it on. It does function for me to re-engage me with connectedness, similar to the story I told about the messy house. It reminds us our time in a body is fleeting. The people and the time in a body for the people I love is fleeting. what am I doing? No. And in a broader sense, it connects us to all things in reminding us that we're impermanent. The delusion of separate self depends on an idea that we're permanent. It actually, if you, again, like root around in that idea when you feel isolated and separate, and you'll always find an idea that we are permanent. Like, oh, I'm me, and this is how I always am. In a moment that we feel isolated, we're forgetting all our relationships, actually. We're forgetting all the people living and dead that are us and are still flowing through us, So in that sense, I think the fourth remembrance opens us to like, oh, I'm part of this world. I'm part of everything, and everything arises and ceases, And it's subtle, but that impermanence is a support for us to really love the world and really care and really understand our place in it. We are passing through, so what are we going to do with that? And that's so when we think we have time, we're like, man, maybe I'm going to distract myself. Maybe I'm not going to be so nice to the people I love. Maybe I'm going to let this familial karma run through me and run the show. But to me, that one in particular wakes me up. And then the fifth one makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, they said 11:20. That's like 3 minutes. As you can see, brevity is not my strong suit. But does anyone have a quick something or comment? Oh yeah, are there people online? Right. Sorry, I forgot to look over there.
Thank you. Frederick had a question about, he mentioned the Heart Sutra, and his question is about one's existence is not separate from all sensory inputs. And he'd like you to talk about that.
Thank you, Frederick. Right. Like we do have a body for now. We do have sense input. The Heart Sutra, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a super foundational, another deeply foundational text to Zen practice. And in it, we say things. So we have a body, we have a particular being. And we usually in a Zen temple, we would recite this every day. And it includes saying, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. People are like, what? The Heart Sutra is a 40-line condensation of the prajna paramita, the perfection or the engagement of wisdom. There's also like 300,000 lines, 100,000 lines, 30,000 lines, 8,000 lines. And then the Heart Sutra is like this distillation. So I feel like the most helpful thing I can offer is like engage with it and chant it. And sorry, I'm looking at you. Sorry, Frederick. Engage with it and chant it and take it in as a body. Chanting it every day is similar to the 5 remembrances. It's very helpful. How is it for you? And what does it do to you? And how does it land? And how does it shape you? To be in a body and definitely have sense organs, and also then to hear the teaching. This is a teaching of Avalokiteshvara, waking up and being like, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no 11 heads, no 1,000 arms. And that's also true. Sorry to be cryptic. But that really is what, take up that paradox, or what feels like a paradox. That's our engagement in Zen. Thank you. Okay, dear people, I want to just end by saying I really welcome your input and your feedback. And I teach and work at the Brooklyn Zen Center. My email is Sarah with an H at brooklynzen.org. If there's something that's come up today that is confusing or interesting or something you want to follow up, please reach out to me. The Dharma to me is really about our conversation, our relationship, our engagement together. So please let that be ongoing. Thank you very much.